All right, so I just wanted to talk for a few minutes about a subject that I care a lot about, and the audience that I hope is listening to this is just your average writer. Just this is dedicated to any writer out there that at times has felt frustrated, not so much in their writing or the writing process, but merely in the lack of appreciation, maybe not the lack of, I'm not speaking if someone does not like your work. I'm talking about the lack of appreciation for your vision or what the process is, or people that just don't seem to understand the root or the pure element of why you're even writing to begin with. And that might be kind of a verbose preface to what I'm speaking of right now, but what I'm really going to be speaking about right now is something that I call the doubt of the benefit. And that is something that I think a lot of readers give aspiring writers, especially when an aspiring writer respects their audience and hands it to them and asks for help or constructive feedback. There's a lot of the doubt of the benefit. And everyone knows what the benefit of the doubt is. It's when someone essentially just believes that by the end of the process, that trusting them through that process will be rewarded, and that their feelings that this will turn out well will come to fruition in anything. That, it was worth reading this, that this will all make sense, that this will be good by the time I'm finished with this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what does the average audience member usually, in my perspective, and I'm not just speaking for myself here, I'm speaking for a lot of other people that have talked about why isn't this person understanding what it is that I'm writing? Or why are they fighting me on something that I know doesn't really need to be something that we're arguing about? Or why is this one of the things that is so minuscule to the overall story that they're choosing to make a huge deal about, that it's really not the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of why I'm even doing this respective piece of work? And that's something that I think a lot about, and something that I think is really of disservice to writing, the writing process, to reading, to enjoying literature, enjoying the arts, etc. And my theory behind this is that a lot of the audience, the people that constitute your audience, most of them, for some reason, and I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of people have the inability to abstract your vision and put it into their own mind. And it's particularly stressful for a screenwriter, because when you're writing a script, everything is structurally essentially a skeleton. There's still a lot that needs to be left up for analysis, and things like table work and the actors' motivations and their analysis and their preparation to the work, and that whole discussion that happens from the script being done all the way through pre-production into production till the editor takes the raw footage and puts it into a film. So I guess I just wanted to talk about this for a little bit and basically let any writer out there that might be hearing this from someone that, does not have an Oscar, okay, but has made a lot of films and has had some success in regional film festivals and has gotten some nice critiques back from other people, and some not so nice ones. So I've experienced the good with the bad, but I just wanted to tell you that you're not alone in this. And I want to go a little bit more in depth with this, but I just wanted to state that fact today, and hopefully someone out there is listening to this. But the thing that I think is perhaps the biggest component to this quote unquote doubt of the benefit is when an audience member or a reader of this, and I'm talking particularly in scripts and screenplays, but it happens in general prose and it happens in poetry as well. But it's when someone becomes obsessed with, quote unquote, is this realistic, unquote, that if this certain element to a given set of circumstances within a plot for a character or characters, is this exactly what would transpire? Is what they seem to become so enamored with. And this is something that's a little frustrating for me because I don't know if that is really the sole focus of why stories exist to begin with. Artists will tell you, and writers, of course, will say that so much of literature, the arts, prose, whatever you want to call it, anything that we're expressing via an exploration into mankind at its best or its worst, that we're really trying to find the truth rather than, in my opinion, the realistic nature of events. The truth is what we're looking for, not these minuscule, which they often are, or very petty, again, I say circumstances within that given scene or that given plot line. And I'll give you an example, okay? So I wrote a screenplay about a prison environment, and the person that read this was really fixated on the fact that I based an execution that happened in the morning rather than midnight, because it's popular culture, I assume, understanding that executions happen at midnight. Actually, it's not that common factually to happen at midnight anymore. They usually do happen in the morning. But lo and behold, let's just say for argument's sake that they do happen at midnight. Is this really that important to the plot line? Or, I mean, in the overall scheme of things, is it, or I should even, expound upon that and say, is it even really important to the storyline? Does this matter? Does the sake of this happening at 12 midnight versus 5, 6, 7 a.m. really change the motivations of the characters or what they want or how they're responding to their failures in life or just the overall complexities and the hardships or the problems of humanity in general? I just don't think that that's really that important to the overall message of the story that I'm telling you about. And I guess that the only thing that, you might be listening to this and say, well, why are you essentially making excuses for your mistakes in terms of how factually realistic something should be in your film or your story versus what it would be like in real life? Well, I guess the thing that kind of annoys me about that is that if something is on screen, or if it's being broadcast into our living rooms via a television network, or if it's on a stage at the Winter Garden Theater, we seem to know that some things might not be totally factually correct, as I would say before, but we accept them and we don't nitpick about it. It seems like only the works that are not yet up there on the big screen are indeed the ones that we're going to focus about and ridicule every last element that, again, might not be, from a factual standpoint, 100%, as they would say, realistic. I mean, does it really matter? It doesn't matter to me. But if we're just going to go by that same standard of this is good or this is not good or these are the things that need improvement, blah, 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 blah. I'll give you an example that happens many times in many narrative storylines via all mediums, and that's the role of a psychiatrist. Oftentimes is portrayed as someone that is doing talk therapy with someone, going into these existential conversations, talking about the deeper things in life for an hour, having these big arguments that really showcase, it's really become more of a metaphor for the deeper feelings that the patient and the doctor have for each other is often the storyline. Of course, The Sopranos is a big example of this, but there's many others out there in various forms of media. And to me, it just really kind of irks me that that could be acceptable, even though I know that there's not going to be any physician in any specialty, especially even psychiatry, yes, that is going to sit there for an hour listening to someone go off and on about, their thoughts, their feelings, their reservations, their insecurities. That's what talk therapists are for. So if it's really that inconsistent that something would be transpiring, let's say an execution at midnight versus 6 a.m., why isn't it that we aren't rejecting more of these more common, I guess, misnomers that are constantly perpetuated in and out of the media? I can give you more examples. One thing that is very, very bizarre, I guess, is that everyone seems to believe and need in these cop shows like Law and Order, etc., that police officers Mirandize the suspects or the ones that are getting arrested, the perpetrators, if you want to call it, the defendants. And you all know that. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Police don't have to do that, and rarely they do, actually. When someone is actually brought into custody, it's usually only when there is an expression from the government to the defendant that we are going to have a formal interrogation right now. You are indeed waiving legal representation, as in a lawyer, to be with you during this, that they have to really go into that. That's really what that whole Miranda case was about. And, I might be sounding like I'm bringing up, sort of very rudimentary, small, minute issues with this, but it's not an issue. It shouldn't be an issue for these unpublished or these scripts that are still, lingering around or haven't been picked up or haven't been in production or haven't been distributed. And I just get annoyed that so many people, sort of focus on these little areas that are perhaps, again, maybe not factually correct, but that really are not doing a huge disservice to the story or the beauty or the aesthetics or the metaphor, the representation of an overall storyline. And you can find them in pretty much any legitimate movie, that there's something there that is probably not 100%, again, factually relevant or correct. And again, I go back to that doubt of the benefit versus benefit of the doubt. Is why does it need to be on the screen for us to not have to nitpick? Because if you did find that, I'm going to say the average audience member, if they did pick this up and they worked in psychiatry or they had an understanding that this is not exactly how it worked, that a psychiatrist would not get this emotionally invested with a patient over that course of time that Dr. Melfi did with Tony Soprano, would they reject it altogether and say, you really need to work on this. You really need to, David Chase, do a lot more research into how this works before you write this. And that's the thing that annoys me. That's the thing that I talk about when I talk about the benefit of the doubt rather than the doubt of the benefit. Just because it's not been produced or it's not been released to the public in this quote unquote legitimate way through a legitimate venue of a big movie production company or a network doesn't mean that it's not a perfectly fine script that theoretically could be picked up if someone just said, we're going to do this now. And a lot of people, go through these rewrites and these edits of things, and they keep trying to go to the core root of it, but they're not getting to that root of the truth. They're getting toward the root of these minuscule blemishes from the perspective of the audience, of that this needs to be worked on, that it needs to constantly be going through these rewrites, when I really don't think that it does a lot of the times. Am I a proponent of not trying to make your work better? No, I'm just saying that some works are perfectly imperfect. Okay. And if we want to move away from this whole story or this whole point that I'm trying to make with, being totally obsessed with plot versus story, which is essentially what I'm saying, that you're more focused on the plot than the story. And those two are not interchangeable. We can move over just to the basic idea of editing this, or, just having this idea of really having a vision. A writer has a vision. You might not be able to see it yet, especially when we're talking about scripts, because it still has to go through many other processes before it finds its intended medium, which is the screen, being dramatically performed out, and the cinematographer adds elements, and the editor does, and the director does. But that's really what I'm trying to speak about is that, when something is when something has not been produced, that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be edited so many times over. And the truth gets lost in that a lot of the time. Again, the truth is not also, when we talk about things that are not interchangeable, truth and realism are not interchangeable. And I see a lot of people rewriting this and getting obsessed. And really, the writer inadvertently becomes these initial reviewers of something that is, again, perhaps imperfectly perfect. It was meant to break the rules. It's very interesting to me that all these writers and these directors and these overall storytellers can initially be, really beat up for breaking the rules, and then 40 years later, they'll get lifetime achievement awards for breaking the rules and really not wanting to adhere to the formulaic elements that these aforementioned reviewers that I was talking about that initially will read your work before these writers have made it big are telling them to do. And I just think that that's, something that is quite a shame. And I think that a lot of writers start spinning their heads and wondering, what is wrong with this, and there might not be anything wrong with it. Does it deserve to be published or produced? Maybe, maybe not. But if there's a vision there and someone gives you a lot of feedback and you change a lot of that, unless you were hired to be, writing a script for an actual paycheck, and this is something that's a very impersonal process, and many times I think it's a damn shame to just edit most of it, because that's why you wrote it to begin with. And that's something that I fight with a lot of people about, is that, there's that fine balance between wanting to not be very insecure about your work and unwilling to do something about it to make it better, or feeling, this blind loyalty to your work that it's automatically the best and there's no chinks in your armor. But that's just the thing. I mean, the chinks in your armor of your writing might be why it's beautiful in and of itself. So, it's a really fine line, and I understand that, but it's just something that I think needed to be expressed today, and hopefully someone will go through it and listen to this and maybe make some comments about this. But, it just comes down to this very element that, I was getting, ranked on by a friend of mine once and said, this is very good poetry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I pulled out, a poem that actually had been published, and he said, and I pretended that it was actually mine, and he read it again. This will never get published. Well, it did once before, just because you see it now in an old book that smells like a book with a hardcover didn't make it a worse poem when I told you it was written by me and I just scribbled it down on a notepad. That's what I mean about the doubt of the benefit rather than the benefit of the doubt. I hope I was very articulate in this little vlog, and I hope that someone somewhere will get some appreciation from it, and perhaps you'd be interested in commenting on this below. Thank you.